Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, Alternative Parties friends, we have another exciting guest. His name is Hector Roos. He's running for governor in Florida with the Libertarian Party. Welcome to the podcast, Hector.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
Sure thing. Hector, let's get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
Sure. So briefly, I came to politics, I guess, as a child of the Ron Paul Revolution. I was involved in the campaigns starting when they started, almost at the moment they started in 2017. So I was active in Florida. I'm active there now as part of the the number 9 meetup in the country. But generally speaking, I'm a college grad. I was raised in Florida. I'm not, born in D.C. actually. But the short story of it is that I'm been committed to the liberty movement for a number of years. I've helped many candidates run for office throughout the state of Florida, and I now find myself running for governor under the Libertarian Party. Now simply to set Florida free and make it independent from simply the largesse of the federal government, the strings attached and bailouts that we've seen in the last couple of years, especially during the COVID era, and ultimately to get rid of a broken taxation system that exists here and state monopolies that are choking the lifeblood of the economy here in Florida and its future, of course.
Sure. So kindly tell our audience, additionally, how you plan to implement your Libertarian Party vision as governor.
So the first thing we have to understand is that political change only happens when the people are ready for it. When people ask for it, politicians listen. So politicians, by definition, they're risk averse. They basically almost never want to assume any responsibility for taking care of any issues of particularly anything that's controversial. So in Florida, we've seen decades-long desert of activity in regards to even minor reforms to issues such as property taxes, property insurance, even the monopolies that control the insurance, electricity, and a whole host of other industries. So what a libertarian running for office sets a standard, right? This is what the votes that are received by a libertarian candidate are the politicians look at it and they take notice. So and then they adjust their policies, just like in that sense. If I win for Libertarian governor, as a Libertarian governor, it's actually even more obviously it's even better because then elections will essentially clarify what the role that politicians should be having in Florida. Florida, we have a plurality win state, so we have a 33% plus 1. Is the win number here.
Well, that's good.
Right.
So on your campaign website, I read about something called red flag laws. Would you kindly explain that to our audience? What are red flag laws and what do you plan to do about them?
So everyone should have heard about red flag laws most recently because Congress just passed a national standard about red flag laws in about a month and a half ago.
Okay.
Red flag law are part of a gun confiscation scheme. They're not simply gun control. They take it a step further and they basically legitimize the taking of personal firearms and essentially self-defense without a trial, without due process. What it essentially becomes is someone makes a complaint, typically someone that has some connections to the person, makes a complaint that they feel fear, that the person is basically lost it mentally. Police without any they make this report to the police. Police simply takes it on the word, presents an application to a judge that this person has triggered a red flag for them, and that we want to go and take their firearms, which is something very very simple. There's no jury. There is no notice to the person that the local police department is seeking to have their firearms away, and it's taken away, quote unquote, temporarily. But the idea here is that we flip jurisprudence on its head, and sort of the American standard has always been you are determined to be innocent and you have to be found guilty. Here you are guilty, and then you have to basically ask for your guns back. You have to prove yourself innocent. So that is this is part of this is part of this soft tyranny that that's slowly been creeping into the American justice system, starting with things like asset forfeiture laws, where you don't have to be even accused of a crime to have your possessions remanded to the state.
That doesn't sound constitutional, those red flag laws. Has there been a constitutional challenge to it?
Of course. But as you can tell, I've been a little hoarse, and I'll explain why. I've been spending the last couple of weeks traveling, telling people that the importance of red flag laws really comes down to the importance of this whole host of the idea of self-defense, the Second Amendment. So there have been legal challenges, but mostly, more than anything, there have been equivocations. Right? So you have people in Second Amendment groups and gun lobby that have said that we will compromise on Second Amendment issues because they're reasonable, right, or they're common sense. So there are there have been court cases recently, as even in New York. New York State actually had the more recent court case citing for gun owners, particularly with where you can't discriminate if you have you can't particularly discriminate without any arbitrarily for the right to own or have firearms. But the reasoning behind that is why I mentioned it and why it's so important is they made it, the Supreme Court made it expansive on the definition of self-defense, and particularly for ownership purposes. So in other words, you can't have unreasonable and arbitrary restrictions to have access to it unless it's already codified. So in other words, if you are you shall have you shall be able to carry is different than you may carry, which New York State's one of those may. So in Florida we have a shall. We have shall. So in other words, they shall ask permission in this case for the franchise. So there's a lot of states that are starting to push back against this idea of asking permission to be able to carry. In other words, permitless carry or constitutional carry. And that's the current debate right now around the country. So Texas just passed permitless carry, also called constitutional carry. I believe Missouri did, Indiana just did, and those are obviously when it comes to Texas, it's just a big state. So these are things, and I'll tell you, it's California already had it never lost it. Actually, already had this idea of permitless carry. So there's states like Florida and some of these other deep red states that for one reason or another, and I can get into it, but require permission from people to actually carry firearms, and openly, whether openly or otherwise concealed.
So it sounds like the little words like shall and may make a world of difference. Absolutely
do. So at this point, the future is whether we open up the definition and the franchise of self-defense to individuals or not. And so that's really what it comes down to. We're trying to break away from the history of the state, particularly in the southern United States, from exercising these restrictions.
Okay.
So in addition to that,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's an old tradition to essentially restrict the people's right to defend themselves, because ultimately, and we can go into it if you like, but I'll listen to your question.
So it's bigger in the South than in the North?
So it's basically despotic in the same way, but for different reasons. So in the North,
Okay.
you had gun control laws that were designed predominantly to actually reduce the influence of labor unions, basically sabotaging or standing for protest and preventing people from entering industrial parks, right? So they would strike, they would open carry, they would defend themselves from, the Pinkertons who would come in to try and bust their protest. Some of the most, if you ever look back at the history of this, they would have basically gunfights in front of these foundries and industrial areas. In their conversation. That's in the North. In the South, of course, it's something, they're fighting over a different franchise, which was voting and even owning property. For the most part, it was in the South as part of the tradition of Jim Crow to restrict the right of ownership of prior property, and of course the vote, by simply denying people the right to protect themselves. And, what would happen is people would be intimidated into leaving or not participating as a result. So when people went down south, for instance, we're not talking about too long ago either. We're talking about in Florida, the civil rights movement actually, the modern civil rights movement didn't end until the 80s. And so you would basically require people who were gathering petitions for, let's say, to create the Republican Party. They would, what would happen is they would open carry to, deter people who would try and intimidate them from trying to undermine the control of the Democratic Party in Florida. That was true in many southern states too.
Interesting. That's a fascinating start.
Fascinating history of gun control. History of gun control is very fascinating because it's not a left or right issue. At the end of the day, it's really this who controls the free speech, right? Because remember, we all believe that for Americans, we believe in civil rights. We see we have when the First Amendment fails, we expected to have the Second Amendment to protect ourselves.
So you see the First and Second Amendment as linked?
Oh, all rights are linked, but certainly the founding fathers made sure that the order was very clear on the importance of the Bill of Rights.
So the order was not something that was arbitrary. It was very deliberate.
Exactly.
Interesting. So in addition to this, what other issues are on your platform for governor?
Oh, well, the reason why we talk about red flag laws would be remiss if I didn't say is that, in Florida, there's the activists, self-defense and Second Amendment, and generally those who support the right to bear arms in Florida have been pushing back and asking Tallahassee, that is the legislature, and the governor's office, the governor himself, help expand gun rights in Florida. And unfortunately, what's happened is mostly silence. There has been some debate, but the reality is that after the school shooting that happened in Martinsville and Douglas in 2017, the legislature just kind of took a step back and said, "Oh, we're just going to be firmly for gun control." And so this is basically the first Republican legislature that I'm aware of that has a very pro-gun control position. And so what they started doing back since then is they raised the age limit to purchase firearms. They've obviously created red flag laws in Florida, and ultimately and they've refused to even have a debate on constitutional carry or permitless carry, which is sad. I mean, unfortunately, we have a governor who here in Florida who actually since 2019 has been on the record saying that red flags are useful, right? And they essentially has been supportive of it. Most recently, saying in June there was a press conference where he said that people in this position of the enforcement of red flag laws should proceed, and people who are expressing mental illness or kind of how he said lunatics should essentially be shot on the street for resisting having their guns taken away. So we've lived the last 2 years in since the COVID lockdowns and whatnot. We want to say that it will never happen here. It will, it was only temporary. Tyranny was only temporary, but the reality comes down to is personally, I've lost faith in the current leadership in Florida that's run by Republicans. The Democrats have refused to be an opposition party, and for the most part, are just lockstep with Republicans because, frankly, they don't disagree on much of anything except how much abortion should be happening in Florida. I mean, that's really what they're all disagreed about, or something about parental rights, which is really dealing with the edges of where the responsibility of government is to help offer public education. And in that, but in the middle of that, regular Floridians are lost in the conversation. So what creeps up is this situation we have with inflation, with the economy, and in the midst of this, people are panicking in Florida. They're very concerned about their future in terms of economically. So when we have a regressive property tax in Florida where it's not based on the ability to pay. The effective property tax rate is actually higher than California, and it essentially goes like this: we have a small cap, we have a relatively cap on the growth of taxation, but the taxation is allowed to grow as much as it wants, in the event that the property values actually increase. So what we have is this double whammy of inflation, hitting affecting the prices on every consumer good that you would have, including food, gas, fuel, and eventually even our, but not our wages, of course. And then on top of that, our property taxes go up at the same time. So I mentioned earlier that's I would support as governor simply abolishing the property tax and just ending the stimulus for all, because basically it's broken. It's easier just to end it and let the local governments figure out a new way to tax people. In any case, our property taxes are collected, and for the most part, they're sent up to Tallahassee. When it comes to schools or courts, those essential services that government usually typically provides, all those revenues are actually directed to the state, and then they're essentially handed back out in form of the annual budget. So it's not that much of a hardship in terms of the process itself. Now, I said there's a lot of monopolies also out there that's causing even more pain and suffering, especially the homeowners. So we have a crisis with property insurance where people are being dropped we have a monopoly in property insurance. We have a publicly held corporation called Citizens that offers property insurance, and essentially this has become the first option in the market, so that's monopoly. And now, and so many people are being kicked out of that public plan. They're forced to go to a private plan that would cost them 5 times, maybe 6 times more. In other words, it would add to their mortgage another $8,000 to $10,000 a year in the cost of their mortgage. Nobody can afford that. So, of course, people are panicking because people are losing their homes to just simply that issue alone. The governor said that they called for a special session to fix it in May. We're now in August and nothing has happened, so he chickened out completely about it. Like I said, politicians like to avoid controversy, and they certainly have. And what ends up happening is now the private insurance companies are taking on so many customers, but they couldn't afford to, because of the cost of inflation and the increased cost of replacing the cost of home replacement, right? If the home is lost, how much does it cost to actually replace the home in terms of new construction? They can't afford to even to service those policies. So a lot of the private sector property insurances are actually just dropping everybody and leaving Florida. So right now there's there's a big scare amongst all the rest of these carriers that they don't have enough finances to serve, and this will happen. So the governor announced last week that essentially he was going to fix it by nationalizing the entire private sector property insurance industry, by basically saying, oh, you don't have the money, we'll give you the money, and we'll tell you not to drop these people from the plan. That's literally nationalization. And of course, you do it for 1 year, then people are going to keep asking for a second year, and it's just throw more money at it. So I see all this, and the property and taxes actually have only gone up for individuals. Particularly toward individuals, not businesses. And meanwhile, we're talking about all these increases in cost of living. In Florida, it's actually the governor took a victory lap announcing that Florida has the highest record budget surplus in its history, $21 billion. Now, if we had simply lowered the cost of living, adjusted these tax rates, using that surplus to lower the overall rates, just restructured property insurance. Even the public sector one, it would have resolved this issue for years to come, but they did not. They basically hoarded cash and letting people literally lose their homes. So that's kind of how callous and disconnected, not simply just the Republicans, but the Democrats aren't complaining about this either. And meanwhile, the governor's just taking victory laps on this. I could go on with the other monopolies like energy, gas, and certainly simple things like internet access. Florida had just allowing a lot. These are the big monopolies on energy. We're the Sunshine State, but we're about 23 on the list of states that actually have how much solar production they actually have. And I'm pretty sure it's in the 30s actually. But so in other words, and why is that? Because of the protectionism that's built into the monopolies. So they just simply do not want people to have their own ability to, generate energy from simple solar panels on the roofs. So it comes down to those things. I think ultimately, though, we have to get away from those. We do have to restructure those issues. But more importantly, those are internal issues for the state. The biggest issues is the politicians do not feel any repercussion, because if there's an issue, they'll simply go to the federal government, and ask for a bailout, or ask for the federal government to take control. So we have, when it comes to water, for instance, water issues in Florida, I don't know if anyone's heard of the green algae blooms or algae blooms generally. We have a nutrient pollution in the largest waterways in Florida that from time to time when it gets hot causes a proliferation of algae or alga that causes basically they process all the oxygen in the water, leads to big fish die-offs. It's disruptive for wildlife and tourism because it just stinks up everything, and I mean everything. And ultimately, they've really just kind of not resolved the issue at the root, and they've kind of blamed the federal government for it. I'm like, no. At this point, we need to take control over these issues. We can't leave the federal government agencies to tell us what to do with our own water and our own drinking water, especially. And those are the big issues and ultimately, even nuclear energy. We have several nuclear power plants in Florida. If we know that Florida's nuclear energy is clean and it works, and ultimately we argue about, hey, why not have our own nuclear regulatory commission? Something that regulates that industry on its own, if that, right? I mean, the idea is eventually we need to make Florida free, and we need to make it free from federal control on the long road to this idea that we don't relate to the type of mandates and power politics, just control that the federal government wants over our lives today. I mean, it's incredible what we've lived in the last couple of years. I became a libertarian. I was already a libertarian philosophically, but I had to change my party because I was just disgusted with the idea that we have a government in Florida that yes, did approve lockdowns. It approved lockdowns for many, many, many months. In fact, we had an emergency order in Florida for 475 days. That just totally disrupted our communities and the way local government even interacts with its citizens. It's only until this past March that masks actually, that is 2 years later, after 15 days to stop the spread, that mask mandates in schools finally ended. So I mean, that's really the conversations here. If I say that we are having the fight of freedom now in Florida, it's because we're only the next mandate, the next emergency order away from this becoming something typical and normal. And I mean, that is a scary thought.
Sure.
We have so much potential. We have so much potential in Florida.
Potential?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, we have so much potential in Florida. We have so much potential in the United States. In today's society, we have so much potential with technology. Ultimately, we've created this. We have this idea of cryptocurrency, for instance. There's no reason why we can't start, transacting in cryptocurrency at the state level to, protect people from the debasement of the U.S. dollar. That's just a Federal Reserve. So I totally see us being able to provide an alternative scheme, take back the regulatory control from the feds, just start going in these directions, not leaving it all up to the feds, where we are allowed to actually stand on our own. And eventually we may one day need to just stand on our own as a actual free state of Florida, free and independent.
Oh my.
Yeah.
So is your party on the ballot for sure, or do you have to work to get the ballot access?
So Florida has automatic ballot access, so it's already ingrained in our Constitution. I went through the Senate check. So that check was processed a month ago. So we're on the ballot in November, no matter what.
Good.
Yes, absolutely. That was something that was done in combination in we actually got that passed in 1998. That's how long we had it.
That's good. That's one less thing you have to worry about then.
Absolutely.
So Hector, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Other libertarians, other minor parties should be, how do I say it, should be looking at the way that referendum was passed and that referendum language, trying to apply it for its own to their own states if they have if they don't have easy ballot access laws. Ultimately, even other third parties come to Florida to come because it's so easy to start a party here that they come here to start theirs, whether it was the People's Party or the Forward Party. They all started. Florida was the first state where they actually became parties. Well,
That's a good idea that they look at that law since it passed.
Right.
So anybody out there, you want to get a law passed in your area, here we have a good law for you. So
yeah, that's
Hector,
right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say we still have to fight for our own ballot access laws. For instance, the People's Party, even though they can become an official party in Florida pretty easily, they still have to face the legislature trying to chip away at it. So the People's Party
so
actually
it can be lost.
No, they could try to restrict it. So the People's Party, for instance, this was going to be their first year with that, partisan candidates on the ballot, and they were blocked by a Florida law that they're challenging now. They have to basically be a member of their party for 365 days before their qualifying period. Of course, the People's Party was only a party like 200 days ago. Like they only got that certification 200 days before qualifying. There was no way they could meet that requirement, and that's part of how they're trying to use legislative action like state statutes to try and undermine ballot access for even minor parties. And why? Because legitimately, so if we have a closed primary system in Florida, and they do, the major parties do not want any competition whatsoever to draw away from participants in their own party of participation. because ultimately that is, they want to avoid sore losers, people from jumping from one party to the next and challenging them to have some notoriety, some name ID, and ultimately they want to control the how many parties, this idea of drift, right? That you can simply not have, you have to be locked into a party to participate in the primaries, quote unquote, which is just just basically restricts people's access to choice on the ballot in the first place. So not every system is perfect, but we have it a lot better than most.
Yes. Let's hope the other states model it sooner rather than later.
Right. I mean, because of that access, we also have a U.S. Senate candidate in Florida, and with Dennis Missigoy, who's running against Marco Rubio, and thankfully there's a lot of energy and angst, anti-incumbent angst out there, and we're all getting a lot of questions regarding our candidacies, but it all comes from just having access to the ballot in the first place.
Makes sense. So how can our audience support your campaign?
Sure. I mean, the idea, there's two ideas, right? The first, of course, is, I'm a candidate for office, so money is the milk of politics. So if anyone can give any money, they can always do that over at roosforflorida.com, ROOS for Florida.com. And the other one is just spread the word. There are libertarians. I actually see my race, and actually the races in Florida, the top of the ticket statewide races in Florida are the top libertarian races in the country right now.
Oh, really?
Because they're just so big. It's the major state. There are no other governor's election, no other statewide elections that really like this. In fact, if I would say there's no other state elections like mine, everything else is kind of like federal, actually. So at a state level, mine might actually be the most highest profile in that sense. Where I'm actually having to talk about the issues that are not the easier. Oh, well, let's we're an anti-war party. Let's stop the war in Yemen. Let's pull back foreign aid. Let's bring the troops home. That's bread and butter on federal issues. But where I have to talk about bread and butter issues is people staying in their homes, where we need access. People need access to their health care rather than a controlled, this idea of managed care that from the government perspective. And I didn't even get into that. So in other words, we support bodily autonomy in the party, and in Florida we did have vaccine mandates, and we continue to do so, and we don't have rigorous religious exemption laws in Florida. In fact, we barely have religious exemption laws because they're constantly ignored. So which is something that people are talking about even in regards to at the national level with the U.S. military. So we just had that legal order come in respecting religious exemptions. But we're here to fight the fight. So we're here to put people on notice that at least the political establishment that we're watching, and we are telling people the truth, and we're giving people an option to vote their conscience, and even vote for just something better. It's not like things won't change unless we provide people choices in the market. Where we believe in the free market, and the free market deserves to also have a role in our politics. We cannot continue to have such limited choices on the ballot as it is. And Americans deserve, all free people deserve a rigorous debate on the issues. We should not demand less. We should demand more.
Well put. Hector, thank you kindly for coming on the podcast and talking about your campaign. We appreciate it.
I appreciate you and everyone listening, and who believes in the message of more voices in our country will produce better results.
Absolutely, that's what we're all about.
Wonderful.
We wish you all the best in your campaign and all your other endeavors.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care and all the best.